What if I told you that some of the most iconic anime characters aren't just well written, they're branded? Think about it. Eren Jeager, L, Aizen, Gojo. These characters don't just exist in their own stories, they leave an imprint, a lasting identity that people recognize instantly. I'm trying something new. We're not just breaking down a character arc, we're analyzing a brand. So for the first video in this series, we're starting with Eren Jeager. If you enjoy this kind of content, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. As I'm sure none of you know, I went to grad school for marketing communications, and I currently work in go-to-market strategy for a tech company. A big part of what we do is understanding how things are positioned, perceived, and adapted over time. And honestly, anime is full of brand analyses waiting to happen. Today we'll look at Eren Jeager, or Jaeger, depending on your translation. He isn't just a protagonist. He's a case study on brand evolution. From underdog hero to feared revolutionary, his image shifts, his messaging changes, and by the end, his legacy isn't even in his own hands anymore. Before we dive into this analysis, I want to set a few ground rules, because if we don't establish boundaries, we're going to end up in a time loop of contradictions, and nobody has time for that. That means I'm not factoring in time travel paradoxes, predestination loops, or the idea that Eren influenced past events even before he made decisions. Why? Because if we include that, we're not actually analyzing a developing identity. We're just acknowledging a pre-written script Eren was always doomed to follow. This is about how he shaped his brand, where it succeeded, and where it failed. So how do we even begin analyzing something like this? Just like with companies, sports teams, or even celebrities, anime characters have a public perception that shifts over time. Some stay consistent, others, like Eren, go through such a dramatic evolution that fans don't even recognize them by the end. To break it all down, we'll look at his foundation, where he started and what defined him early on, what he provided, his impact on those around him as well as the audience, the forces that challenged him, whether it's enemies, allies, or unintended consequences, how his message changed, the rhetoric and language that shaped his identity. Then we'll look at how he got his message across, the channels he used to communicate, and then finally, whether his overall strategy was successful or if he lost control of it entirely. Eren Jeager's story begins in Shiganshina, a town at the outermost ring of humanity's wall territory. His life is flipped upside down when the colossal titan breaches the wall, letting titans swarm the district. Worse, he watches his mother get crushed and eaten in front of him. From then on, Eren isn't just a kid. He's a declaration of war in human form. And at first, that's what defines him. He's relatable, somewhat, he's driven, and he's the perfect protagonist for a straightforward story about vengeance. But of course, Attack on Titan isn't a simple revenge story. As Eren fights, trains, and grows, the series constantly teases a bigger mystery, symbolized by the key to his father's basement. This key is a promise of answers, the thing that will reveal the truth behind the Titans and humanity's confinement. And while the audience has to wait 3 whole seasons for that payoff, it keeps the focus on Eren as the catalyst of change. When we finally get to the truth, that Titans are just pieces of a much larger war, and humanity isn't just fighting monsters, but an entire global conflict, the narrative flips completely. Eren's journey isn't about reclaiming land anymore. It's about rewriting the entire power structure of the world. Now what's interesting is how fans reacted to these changes. Because if you look at Eren's rankings in the official popularity polls over the years, you can actually see his evolution reflected in how people felt about him. In the first poll, Attack on Titan had just started, and Eren was ranked second, right behind Levi. At this stage, he was still a traditional protagonist, emotional, determined, and easy to root for. By the second popularity poll, he had dropped to 3rd place. The series was shifting into more complicated themes, and Eren wasn't as straightforward of a hero anymore. By the 3rd poll in 2017, he dropped again, landing in 4th place. And then in the final poll in 2021, he stayed in 4th place. By this time, he had completely transformed into a villain, making him one of the most controversial characters in the series. This kind of shift is rare in anime. Most protagonists stay consistent because their series want them to remain marketable. Eren, he did the exact opposite. Eren starts off as a vessel for simple, relatable anger. He wants revenge, he wants freedom, and he's willing to fight for it no matter what. But as the world expands, so does his mission. By the time we reach the final arc, the foundation is still there, but now it's covered in so much ideology, conflict, and global warfare that it's hard to tell where the original Eren Jeager even is anymore. Now that we've established where Eren started, let's talk about what he actually offers. And I mean offer in the broadest sense. What does he provide the people around him, and what does he represent? Because if you look at any major figure in history or fiction, they all offer something. Hope, fear, inspiration, destruction. People follow them, fight them, or even worship them based on what they bring to the table. And Eren, he goes through the full spectrum of what a person can offer, from a symbol of survival to an existential crisis in human form. At the beginning of Attack on Titan, Eren's offering is straightforward. Hope through revenge. He's the guy who won't give up. who refuses to accept the nightmare of living inside the walls. And people latch on to that. To his friends and allies, he's a determined figure against the Titans. Even his superiors, who thinks he's reckless, see potential in him. For the audience, he's the ideal protagonist for an underdog story. We're meant to root for him, to want him to succeed, because his goal is framed as something undeniably good, humanity taking back its freedom. But here's the problem. His entire offering is reactive. He's giving people an enemy to fight, but he's not offering a plan. And that becomes painfully clear once Attack on Titan pulls the rug out from under all of us. The moment everything shifts is the scene at the ocean, when Eren, staring at the endless horizon, says,
"向こうにいる敵全部殺せば俺たち自由になれるのか?"
Up until now, Eren's offering has been a straightforward path forward. Fight, win, reclaim freedom. But suddenly, even he doesn't sound convinced anymore. It's not just internal doubt, it's how everyone around him reacts. This is where he stops offering just hope and starts offering fear and uncertainty. Even his silence becomes unnerving. The last time we see him, he was still questioning things. The next time, he's infiltrating Marley, disguised, calm, and terrifyingly unreadable. Suddenly, the lines are blurry. To some, he's still a hero. To others, he's a warmongering terrorist. And worst of all, he doesn't seem to care about how he's perceived anymore. By the time Eren initiates the rumbling, he isn't just feared, he's inescapable. His offering is no longer hope or even fear. It's absolute destruction. At this stage, it doesn't matter what anyone thinks of him. He's no longer asking questions, he's answering all of them. Eren has spent his entire life chasing freedom, fighting for it, defining it, reshaping it to fit his vision. But in doing so, he becomes a slave to it. His entire existence is now bound to this one purpose, destroying everything that stands in the way of Eldia's freedom, no matter the cost. While he's taking freedom away from the rest of the world, he's giving absolute freedom to the Eldians of Paradis. Not just freedom to survive, but freedom to make their own choices. They can celebrate him or condemn him. They can live peacefully or wage war in his name. And most importantly, they are free to kill him. His last offering isn't salvation, isn't security, it's choice. Unlike every other faction who tried to force an ideology on Paradis, Eren doesn't demand loyalty, doesn't ask to be remembered as a hero. He simply ensures that his people, the ones who had no choice before, will now have every choice in the world. By the time he dies, Eren has made himself into an irreversible event. His offering no longer belongs to him. It belongs to those left behind to decide what it all meant. Now that we've established what Eren offers, let's talk about who challenges him. But we're not looking at this like a traditional competitive landscape. Normally, we'd compare rival brands, market share, and influence. That's not what we're doing here today. Instead, we're looking at how these forces shape Eren's brand. Every major opposition doesn't just want to fight him. They define him, distort him, or even reinforce his place in the world. I'm breaking this down into two major groups. One, direct opposition, forces that actively stand against Eren and what he represents. And two, parasitic partners. Not enemies, but groups that latch onto his image and reshape it for their own benefit. Because not every competitor wants to destroy you, some just want a piece of your success. For most of Attack on Titan, Marley isn't just a military power, it's a system of control. They don't just rule over Eldians, they dictate how Eldians see themselves. Through propaganda, fear, and rewriting history, Marley brands Eldians as devils, a threat that must be contained or destroyed. And Marley's strategy is brilliant. They don't just tell the story to the world, they make Eldians and the rest of the world believe it too. The best example? Willie Typer's declaration of war. Willie doesn't just announce that Eren Jeager is a threat, he crafts a narrative so airtight that by the time he's done, the world doesn't just fear Eren, they expect him to destroy them. First, he plays a humble truth teller, exposing a secret, that King Fritz was actually a pacifist who swore never to use the founding Titan. Then he twists history into a perfect moral lesson. He acknowledges Marley's sins, making himself seem trustworthy, before shifting the blame entirely onto Eren. This speech is the ultimate move in branding warfare. By the time he's finished, Eren only has one option, to prove him right. Marley doesn't have to change its story or convince anyone of anything new. Eren just delivered their proof. That's what makes Marley so effective. They don't fight Eren physically at first, they fight him narratively. And when Eren fights back, he's playing on their terms. For most of his life, Eren was told that the monarchy was absolute, but in reality, the government wasn't an immovable force, it was opportunistic. At first, the monarchy kept him in check, hiding the truth, suppressing his potential, and even trying to eliminate him. But once Rod Rice's government fell, the system that once feared him suddenly needed him. Eren became a tool. The military-led government didn't dismantle power structures, they redirected them. And with every victory, Eren's value increased, not as a person, but as a resource. This is most clear during the episode The Attack Titan, where Premier Bradley refers to Eren as our Titan, objectifying him, identifying him as a tool, a valuable tool, but a tool nonetheless. But here's the problem with being useful. You're only valued as long as you're needed. The same military officials who once feared him stood beside him until he stopped playing by their rules. The monarchy wanted compliance. The new government wanted control. Neither of them ever wanted what Eren did. That's what makes them parasitic. They never believed in his vision. They just used him as long as it benefited them. Once he stepped out of line, they were ready to cast him aside. Eren wasn't a leader to them. He was a means to an end. And when he refused to be controlled anymore, he wasn't just opposed, they attempted to remove him. Like I mentioned earlier, not all competitors are trying to destroy you. Some, they want to take what you built and reshape it to fit their agenda. That's brand hijacking. And that's exactly what happens with the Jaegerists. At first, they're Eren's biggest supporters. They believe in him more than he believes in himself at times. They take his vision of Eldian freedom and turn it into a movement. But here's the problem. The Jaegerists aren't just following Eren, they're reinterpreting him. Eren fights for Eldian survival, the Jaegerists turn it into Eldian supremacy. Eren wants to secure the future, the Jaegerists pull for full militarization. Eren believes in taking action, the Jaegerist demands absolute loyalty. At this point, Eren loses control of his own brand, because symbols don't belong to their creators. They belong to the people who use them. The Jaegerists don't just support him, they remold him into the leader they want. And here's the irony. By the time the rumbling begins, Eren barely interacts with them at all. He doesn't need to. They've already decided who he is for him. This is the danger of branding at its peak. If a message is strong enough, it keeps going whether or not the person behind it is even involved anymore. This doesn't just boil down to good guys versus bad guys. His brand is attacked from every angle. By enemies who frame him as a villain, by a government who uses him to their benefit, and by extremists who distort his message. And in the end, his brand survives, but not in the way he wanted. Every strong presence, whether it's a brand, movement, or historical figure, has a clear position. Positioning isn't just about what you stand for, it's about how you frame yourself. Who are you fighting against? Who are you fighting for? For Eren Jeager, his positioning is both his greatest strength and his downfall. At first, Eren's position is simple. He's humanity's last hope. He's the passionate, unwavering fighter who refuses to back down. He doesn't have the answers, he just knows the walls aren't it. But once he realizes the Titans aren't the real enemy, this positioning becomes useless. And so, he rebrands himself. No more speeches, no more fire. Instead, he's quiet, unreadable, calculating. Suddenly, Eren isn't just reacting to the world, he's actively participating in it. While parody debates and Marley invades, Eren acts. And for a while, this works. People follow him because he's the only one taking action. But isolating yourself while claiming to know best, that makes you dangerous. Eren stops explaining himself. He lets people assume whatever they want. And in doing so, he becomes something bigger than himself. By the time the rumbling begins, Eren isn't positioning himself at all anymore. He doesn't need to. The world has already done it for him. To Marley, he's the ultimate villain. To the Jaegerists, he's a god. To his friends, he's a tragedy. And the thing is, this is exactly what Eren wanted. He ensures he pushes everyone to their breaking point until they have to kill him. Eren's positioning is a masterclass in transformation. He starts as a relatable underdog. He then evolves into a revolutionary leader. And then in the end, as a force of destruction that must be stopped. If positioning is how you want the world to view you, messaging is how you tell them what to see. It's the words, phrases, and ideas that define an identity. And Eren understands messaging better than most, shifting from a fiery call to arms to something far more unsettling. And as his message changes, so does his audience. In the beginning, Eren's message is loud, emotional, and simple. The words don't just define him, they rally others against the Titans. He's a symbol of resistance. His passion is infectious. But this kind of messaging only works in a world of Titans. Once he learns the truth about Marley, about the real enemy, his old words become insufficient, and so his messaging has to change. By season 4, Eren barely speaks at all. Gone are the passionate speeches. Now when he does speak, it's deliberate, measured, hollow. His words shift from rallying cries to eerie statements of facts. Eren isn't asking for followers. He's making it clear he'll act whether they support him or not. And that brings us to the rumbling. By the time the rumbling begins, Eren's messaging has taken a different scale. He isn't convincing or inspiring anymore, he's declaring. And then he stops talking entirely. Once the rumbling starts, Eren goes completely silent. No speeches, no justifications, not even to his own allies. The Jaegers continue to fight in his name, believing in a cause he never directly confirmed. The world burns, but Eren, he says nothing. Now, that's not entirely true. Liar! He does speak again, but not to the world, only to a select few. In the final stretch of his life, Eren abandons public messaging altogether. He only has deeply personal, one-on-one conversations. With Armin, he drops the act. He admits his selfishness, his fears, as well as his contradictions. With Mikasa, he frames his own death as inevitable and spends his remaining time in the past with her. After everything, after fiery speeches, after world-shaking declarations, his final message is left for history to decide. Let me differentiate between messaging and communication, because you may think that they're one and the same. Messaging is strictly the words you utilize. Communication is the channels you use to convey that messaging, whether it be speaking, written word, text messages, flyers, whatever works for you. Because even the most powerful message is meaningless if it isn't communicated effectively. Eren Jeager doesn't just change what he says, he changes how he says it. Early on in the series, Eren communicates like most anime protagonists. Directly, emotionally, and with no filter. If he wants something, he declares it. If he's angry, he screams it. If he believes in something, he makes sure that everyone knows it. His raw, loud, impulsive communication works at first, but the louder you scream, the more predictable you become. And Eren, he learned silence is even more powerful. Eren's greatest shift happens between season 3 and season 4. It's not just a personality change, it's a tactical shift in communication. Where he once screamed his intentions, he now lets others figure them out. By withholding his true thoughts, he forces a few things. The Jaegerists to fill the silence with worship, Marley to fill it with fear, and his friends to fill it with doubt. By saying nothing, Eren controls everything. His best examples, infiltrating Marley. No grand announcement, he just blends in until it's time to act. Breaking out of prison. No speech, no justification, he just walks out. When he betrays Zeke, Armin has to deduce Eren's true motives, because Eren never confirms them. During the rumbling, the world burns, and Eren, he says nothing. Armin has to ask Eren if this is his version of freedom. At this point, Eren is using something akin to the power of negative space. If you've seen my negative space in Bleach video, you know that what's absent is just as important as what's present. By refusing to justify his actions, he removes himself from the conversation. He's reaffirming his position by saying next to nothing, because Eren Jaeger's greatest tool was never just his power. It was his ability to control how people understood him. And in the end, that's what made him inescapable. At this point, we've explored how Eren builds his brand, how he communicates it, and how different groups perceive him. Now let's step back and assess the full picture. What makes Eren's brand so powerful? Where does it fall apart? And what opportunities did he either seize or completely ignore? This is the Jaeger Report, a full breakdown of his brand's strengths, weaknesses, and long-term impact. Eren's brand isn't just memorable, it's world-changing. From day one, Eren's greatest strength has been his unshakable determination. He doesn't just believe in his cause, he's willing to destroy the world for it. That kind of conviction makes people follow you, fear you, or both. Whether it's fighting titans, standing against Marley, or challenging fate itself, Eren's brand has always been about breaking free from oppression. Early Eren was a hot-headed kid who wanted revenge. By season 4, he had rebranded himself entirely. Silent, brooding, unpredictable. This made him far more intimidating, proving that sometimes saying less makes people listen more. Now, let's take a look at where Eren's brand falls apart, because even the most powerful brands have flaws. While Eren gains followers, he pushes away the people who actually care about him. Mikasa, Armin, Historia. He stops communicating honestly, and by the end, even his closest allies don't know if they can trust him. Eren's shift from inspirational leader to silent terror makes him unpredictable, but also isolates him. He goes from uniting people to being seen as a force of destruction with no room for negotiation. While his brand is strong, the Jaegers hijack his message, turning him into something even more radical than he intended. And because he rarely corrects them or speaks for himself, his brand ultimately spins out of his control. If Eren had played things differently, his brand could have had a very different ending. If he had let Armin and Mikasa in on his plan earlier, he could have gained strategic support without isolating himself. Instead, he treats them like obstacles. Once Eren gains ultimate power, he has more options than just destruction. Eren's biggest threats weren't just external enemies, they were fundamental flaws in his approach. Eren's brand is built on free will, yet ironically, his belief that he can't escape the future he's seen is what locks him into his path. He doesn't fight fate, he fulfills it. By making himself the villain of history, Eren ensures that the world unites against him. He removes any chance of coexistence, setting himself up for total rejection, even by his own people. After his death, Eren's image is rewritten by the survivors. He doesn't get to control how history remembers him, and the result is a brand that puts him between being a martyr and a monster. When you step back, Eren's brand is one of the most complex in anime history. He starts off as a symbol of hope. He then becomes a weapon of war, and he ends as a divisive figure whose legacy is left for others to decide. Brand analysts and consultants always provide key recommendations after completing a brand analysis, ensuring that a brand can adapt, strengthen its messaging, and address critical weaknesses. If Eren Jeager had treated his brand with the same level of strategic oversight, he may have retained control of his narrative rather than allowing it to spiral beyond his reach. Eren's brand ultimately suffered due to alienation, loss of control, and the rigidity in his message. To strengthen his position, he could have maintained trust with key allies like Armin and Mikasa, ensuring his strategy had internal support rather than opposition. But his failure to adjust pre-rumbling made his brand synonymous with destruction rather than leadership. Reclaiming his narrative from the Jaegerists and using his founding Titan abilities beyond mass destruction could have allowed him to reshape Eldia's future without guaranteeing global retaliation. Had Eren taken a more strategic approach to his legacy, he could have framed his actions more deliberately instead of letting history define him as a villain. Ultimately, his brand was powerful, but it lacked adaptability. By refusing to pivot when circumstances changed, he ensured that his name would forever be debated rather than celebrated. Now, we do have to take in consideration that this was his plan all along. If we're doing a true brand analysis, we have to look at the implications of his actions on his brand. But what do you think? Is Eren Jeager's brand one of success, failure, or something in between? Drop your thoughts below in the comments. I want to hear your take on how his story unfolded. If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss my next deep dive. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.